Mr. Speaker, this government hasn't found a fat, lean check that they're not willing and anxious and eager to write, Mr. Speaker. We know about the $40 million contract to one U.S. consultant. We know about the $3,500 per day Japanese senseis, Mr. Speaker, but we know that there's a lot more spending going on. This government, Mr. Speaker, has created at least 15 Kaizen promotion offices. This government has hired an army of lean proponents to be advocating lean out in the broader public. But what's important, Mr. Speaker, is for this government to be listening to the frontline healthcare workers who are voicing very real concerns. Frontline healthcare workers, Mr. Speaker, are saying that this government has lost its common sense when it comes to improving our healthcare system. My question for the Premier, as it has been throughout all of question period, what is the total tab of this government's lean promotion cost to the taxpayers of Saskatchewan?
What do we see from that government? We actually see a $23 million cut from the capital budget to build and repair the schools that we need. No wonder we have people like the chair of the public school board in Saskatoon questioning whether schools need to be unhealthy, unsafe, and crumbling before that government will provide any funding or any commitment. We see from this government so often. We bring forward the voice of leadership in this province. We're democratically elected. Ray Morrison? You want to laugh at Ray Morrison, the chair of the public school board in Saskatoon, brings forward concerns and it's dismissed. And all we see is political, partisan spin and boasting from that government. And this is a repeat of what we saw last year. Portables over real classrooms, a P3 rent-a-school scheme instead of honest upfront investments in the schools and classrooms we need, and capital planning. A capital planning list that doesn't even address the needs that school boards have identified as their top priorities. Right. Question to the minister, why does this government stubbornly refuse to listen to the boards and trustees who are on the front lines of education and know their capital needs best?
Mr. Speaker, last July, the government promised to make changes to the minimum wage before 2014. It broke that promise. Saskatchewan has fallen behind Nova Scotia, Quebec, Manitoba, Ontario, BC, the Yukon, and Nunavut. And we know that the Saskatchewan people continue to be squeezed by the rising cost of living. This government needs to increase the minimum wage and index it to inflation.
Speaker, the existing home care program is stretched so thin under this government that it's turning people away that desperately need home care here in our capital city. And this government has $40 million for a U.S. consultant, $3,500 a day for Japanese sensei, and who knows how many more millions for its lean project. Yet our home care program is stretched so thin, Mr. Speaker, that it can't even take on new clients. My question to the Premier, when will this government get its priorities straight and start focusing on the basics in health care, like having the appropriate home care services available for people here in Saskatchewan?
Either the government doesn't know the full cost of its massive lean project in health care, or it doesn't want the public to know the full cost. Either way is unacceptable. Here is what we do know. A $40 million consultant, $17 million Kaizen promotion offices, $730,000 for international travel for health administrators, $30,000 each for doctors to get lean training, and $3,500 per day for Japanese senseis. And that is not the total bill, Mr. Speaker. Again to the minister, why won't he share the full details? What will the full cost be?
Just in the last 4 years, 81 vulnerable children, those in the care of social services, and those who have just left the system have died. 81 deaths of vulnerable children just since 2010. And that doesn't include the deaths from natural causes. It's heartbreaking, Mr. Speaker. Many were incredibly concerned to see this government's budget when it cut $5.6 million in salaries from the Child and Family Services Division of Social Services. Mr. Speaker, the Children's Advocate has said repeatedly that this government's cut to staff at social services are having a negative impact on children in care. Why is this government refusing to listen to these warnings and failing to properly protect children in care?
Speaker, the home care program in the Regina Qu'Appelle Health Region is stretched so thin that it is not able to meet the needs of new clients, and it's cutting services for existing clients. This has been happening since last week, but the Premier, the Health Minister, and the Rural Health Minister knew nothing about it yesterday. To the Minister, Why is this government not paying attention to the basics in health care and seniors' care, like the home care program?
Last Thursday morning, the Premier said on the radio, quote, "We don't have a lean consultant in this province," end quote. My question to the Premier, why did he say that?
Hear, hear.
Dale Shattenkirk is a Kaizen lean black belt, which certainly sounds like a lean expert to me. His consulting company is based right here in Regina. He does lean work in healthcare, Mr. Speaker, in other provinces, albeit for a fraction of the cost that this government is paying. The Kaizen lean black belt from right here in Regina doesn't just question the lucrative contract that this government signed. He questions the wisdom of the approach that we see that this government is implementing when it comes to lean. He questions why this government, Mr. Speaker, is setting up at least 15 permanent Kaizen promotion offices. Especially questions, Mr. Speaker, the hype that this government has created around its lean project.
Right.
Again, Mr. Speaker, these concerns are coming from an expert right here in the province, someone that is pro-lean, saying, Mr. Speaker, that this government's approach is misguided and over the top. My question to the Premier, will he cancel this fat cash cow contract? We hear from nurses and frontline providers, Mr. Speaker, that are concerned that this government has lost its way, doesn't have a focus on patient safety, and doesn't have a focus on quality of care. Will I question a contract that is $40 million to a U.S. consultant? Absolutely. Speaker, that flies in Japanese sensei and pays them $3,500 a day to speak with healthcare workers here in the province? Absolutely.
To the minister, how much money is in this budget for standardized testing? Wrong-headed standardized testing. The minister's answers, he has no answer here today. It's bizarre, it's embarrassing. It's been all over the map on this front. It's been confusing. I know in the fall, now it sounds like they're just full bore ahead, but he won't have he won't share with Saskatchewan people how much he's spending on this front. But last fall, he said he's taking a pause on this front. Now it seems it's full bore ahead. I think it's time that minister realized the realities of today's classroom, that he did the proper thing, that instead of pressing pause, he pressed stop, that he pressed delete, and he stopped wasting dollars in this area that's wrong-headed, put them to work in the classrooms all across Saskatchewan.
The members can scream all they want. These are the facts. You've cut $23 million out of the capital budget for school divisions in this province, and you should be ashamed of yourselves for that. They could have put resources and supports in the classroom with the teachers to help our students, but they ignored that. That's clear in this budget.
This is a pattern with that government. It neglects the basics, it ignores the real issues on the front lines, and it just plows ahead with its own agenda. In health, care facilities put forward urgent requests. The Saskatoon Health Region needs 450 care aides. It asked for only 38. The government forced them to scale that back to 19 care aides. Now, the Saskatoon Public School Division needs 11 portables, and this government says, nope, all you're getting is 2. And oh, by the way, we're also cutting your student funding, forcing the division to make cuts for students. Meanwhile, that government, that premier, is spending untold millions on pet projects like lean and standardized testing. To the education minister, why is this government continually neglecting the basics in our education system while plowing ahead with its costly and misguided pet projects?
The government has occasionally tried to claim that the green transportation crisis is its #1 issue this session, but it didn't even mention the crisis in its budget speech. It's an economic catastrophe facing our province, and the total cost to producers is in the billions. Yesterday's federal legislation is too little and too late. Jerry Ritz did not listen to farmers, and he didn't listen to Saskatchewan. Why is our ag minister more worried about being friends with Jerry Ritz and the Conservative caucus than actually standing up for Saskatchewan? The bill announced yesterday is a dismal failure, Mr. Speaker. It doesn't have higher penalties for rail companies that don't comply. It doesn't build any of the needed capacity we need in the grain system, and it doesn't do nearly enough to get the needed increase in rail cars that will get this grain moving. It's weak, it's late to the punch, and it won't help the captive farmers who are losing billions of dollars. To the minister, why is he continuing to defend what the feds are doing instead of demanding that the federal government actually table legislation that will help farmers in Saskatchewan today?
And then, Mr. Speaker, When we look at agriculture and we see an attention, Mr. Speaker, by this government that has been about providing the bear hugs, has been about providing the love to the federal Conservatives, has been about embracing the federal Ag Minister, Jerry Ritz, on every and any opportunity possible, but then actually not bringing results for the province.
It's a real shame that the Saskatchewan Party MLAs from Prince Albert and Saskatchewan Rivers are so ineffective that they can't even get Prince Albert onto this government's radar, Mr. Speaker. I'll say for them, Prince Albert needs a second bridge, loud and clear. The member from VA Northcote used to recognize that. She said in the last election, and I quote, "One thing that I won't let drop off the table is we need a second bridge as we continue to grow, and I will push hard," end quote. Well, Mr. Speaker, we haven't seen her push hard at all for that bridge. And neither has the member from Prince Albert Carleton, or the member from Saskatchewan Rivers, or the member from Batoche, or the member from Shelbrook, and the list goes on. They've all been very silent. Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, I realize that the PA and area MLAs are not strong voices, but why is this government still completely ignoring this very important need for Prince Albert and Northern Saskatchewan?
Students are going to pay more, and then in terms of programs, they're going to get less because we've seen programs being cut, programs up for review. And in terms of paying more and getting less, Mr. Speaker, I think students deserve better.
When we see a total cut to carbon-reducing green programs now at 83%, when we see the watering down of standards and of targets, Mr. Speaker, that sends a very different message. It, to me, indicates that the walk is not living up to the talk.
The whole issue of Mr. McKinnon's report and setting up of a Bright Futures Front is very curious in how this government appears to have responded to this. Because I listened a little bit to what the Premier was saying yesterday, and it was kind of like, oh, well, we're going to do it, but no, we're going to wait. No, we're going to do it, no, we're going to wait. Mr. Speaker, what has to happen is there has to be a plan. It can't just be on the whim of the Premier. We've seen enough situations where the Premier gets a bright idea and everybody's off in one direction. We see something else that goes the other direction.
We see a quote, Mr. Speaker, from retired nurse C.E. Rothwell's letter to the paper. And she said, quote, "I'm deeply disappointed the Premier drank the Kool-Aid on the lean method," end quote. She says, Mr. Speaker, that lean is an extreme waste of money and a sham. She says there are too many overpaid administrators and not enough frontline healthcare workers. Right. Here's another quote. She says, quote, "We don't need Japanese senseis to fix our very sick healthcare system. We just need a bit of common sense to restore our once enviable system," end quote. I agree with her, Mr. Speaker. We don't need the senseis. We don't need the Kanban training. We don't need more overpaid administrators, Mr. Speaker. We need some honesty and some clear answers from the government when it comes to the expenses for this lean project. Will the Premier have the courage to stand today and say how much they're paying for the senseis and the Kanban seminars? Here, Speaker, I don't know why he doesn't want Saskatchewan taxpayers to know how much they've spent on flying senseis from Japan to Saskatchewan. Right. I don't know why he doesn't want taxpayers to know how much they've spent on on-site Japan Kanban seminars, Mr. Speaker, but perhaps it's because they are embarrassed, Mr. Speaker. Perhaps it's because even proponents, pro-lean people, are sharply criticizing this government for its approach. Right. For the Premier, if he's too embarrassed to actually say how much they've spent on senseis, how much they've spent on the Kanban seminars, Mr. Speaker, then it's time to cancel the fat cash cow contract. Will he do that today?